Landscapes like no other. A story so well told and so well acted that it makes me wonder, what is Disney doing with $300 million? And mechanics that make you wonder, why has no game ever done this before? This is Kingdom Come 2, and it is finally here. I've been waiting years. Since the first came out in 2018, I fell in love with it, and it kind of helped, well, make my channel to where it is at this point. So when the second was on its way, well, there was no one more hyped than I. Yet as I got early versions of it and started playing through it, I realized that there was a lot more to this game than I ever first anticipated. There will be no major story spoilers within this video, so if you haven't played it already, do not fray. I'll show some footage and bits and pieces, but nothing that will really give away what's actually going on. But let's talk about that story. I think the story itself is so much more in-depth and, well, compact with information than the first. Now, don't get me wrong, it does have some of the drawbacks that the first definitely did. A lot of, well, yapping. Many of the characters will go on and on and on about seemingly irrelevant things, but actually taking the time to listen to them will unlock certain parts of information that will help you maybe find some extra goods. I mean, there was a mission where a guy was just telling a story about these two brothers by a lake, and within that mission they found an ancient axe, and I thought, I wonder if that actually was not a story, and it is there, and you can go and find it and then repair it and use it within your early game. These are just side quests that do really help the main storyline itself. The main storyline, of course, follows Hans and Henry, going through delivering this message to, well, Trotsky to try and barter some sort of peace with Lord Otto. However, they, of course, get into some mischief, some mix-ups, and eventually it all culminates in them heading to Gutenberg, which is a huge city which really stands out within this game. There are two main maps. These maps are absolutely humongous. You'll be spending 70-80 hours on the first one just doing all the side content and leveling up your character before you even step foot in the second. I'm going to be honest, a lot of the side content I managed to royally mess up because it's not all a given. This game has the confidence in the player that they can spend hundreds and hundreds of man hours working on certain side quests and stories, building up characters and their backgrounds just for the player to never see them, to never actually experience it, or maybe even just accidentally kill them just exploring the world. The amount of confidence that Warhorse has in their player base is insane. I mean, there was a quest where I had to find a companion and I had to ask a gamekeeper about it, but I saw a man with a bow a few hours earlier that I really wanted, so I killed him and took his bow. That turned out to be the gamekeeper, so that quest couldn't be completed. These are the kind of things that the game does that I think is going to be an amazing thing for most, but a sticking point for some. Sometimes you can't complete quests, or you have to do alternate variations of them because you've messed them up in some way. Time quests do occur where, you know, some character needs to get something done urgently, or they might need your help urgently. If you don't help them in that exact moment or in the time frame they said, maybe meet them at dawn, well, they'll go off and do the quest without you, or they might even be dead by the time you come back. And this happened multiple times before I realized, okay, this game does not wait for anybody. This is a living and breathing world that you are a part of, but you are not in control of by any sense of the imagination. The main storyline is so well acted. I mean, Tom McKay and Luke Dale, who play our two main protagonists here, did a fantastic job, and we have introductions of great characters like the female lead as well, who is an incredible sort of underground spy that we're able to work with, and Godwin, who comes back from the first game, the drunk priest who actually has a bit more of a fleshed out role. You know, you get to play a few set parts with him. It's not overly blown out, and it's kind of just bits to tie in the story, so there isn't really any spoilers about features that Father Godwin has. You are still primarily just playing as Henry and leveling up as his character. As we've already seen from the first game, you carry over some of the skills, but within the first 40 minutes of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you get into a bit of a pickle, you end up getting injured, and you lose a lot of the skills that you built up from that first game. Don't get me wrong, you don't need to have played Kingdom Come 1, but, you know, with some parts of the story, they do hark back to it, so it definitely fleshes out KCD 2, but it doesn't by all means make it paramount. Now, when you're building back up your skills, you get a lot of those same features and mechanics that come back. Lockpicking is almost impossible to start with unless you, well, spend a lot of time lockpicking. You'll go through lockpick after lockpick as you're breaking in doors and chests, and it's a little bit embarrassing, especially when you're trying to lockpick as someone's sleeping and you accidentally wake them up because, well, it broke a bit too loud. So spending a lot of time working on your lockpicks, and of course you can do that throughout the whole world, or there are set areas that will have chests that regenerate their locks just so you can practice it. The same with pickpocketing as well, and takedowns. Sometimes in this game it's not a given that you're going to take down a guard in one. The higher level your opponent, if you go up and sneak behind them, they might fight back and counter your takedown, which, you know, I think is a really, really cool feature. It does make it a little bit frustrating sometimes, so it's often safe just to go with a knife in the back than to knock them out. I think a lot of people were wondering about how big the battles would get, because it is a feature of the first game that people were looking for these huge medieval battles, and then when it actually came to it, it was kind of smaller skirmishes. And admittedly, the first half of the game, you do have a lot of that. There's a couple of sieges that you get to play, nothing huge, but they are pretty impressive, especially the opening prologue siege that I think you've all probably seen a million times. Looks goddamn gorgeous. There's a smaller siege a little bit later on. There's also a few skirmish battles and ambushes. And then later on in the game, well, without spoiling anything, it starts to ramp up a bit more. Jan Žižka is a new character who is a real-life human being. And actually, if anyone's seen the 2019 film Medieval with Michael Caine, it's actually about Jan Žižka. I would recommend going and watching that film if you want a good laugh. It is an awful film. It is so badly done. But it's one of those medieval films. It's just like, you go into it and you're not expecting much. And you don't get much, but you have a bit of fun and entertainment. Definitely go and check out that film, because it ties in so nicely to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. In fact, I'll probably make a full video on that at some point very, very soon. But Jan Žižka is kind of this rebel character that you interact with, and he's a bit of a grey character. You don't know if he's on your side or an enemy, and that's how the story really plays out. Of course, the main aim is for Henry to try and free or help build up the armies to stop Sigismund taking over Bohemia, as King Wenceslas is still in prison. And, well, Jan Žižka, we don't know which side he's on at the start, and that causes a lot of great tension. One of the things I have noticed with this is there are a few bits with voice acting that are hit and miss. In cutscenes, these cinematics are absolutely gorgeous and so much time has been spent on them. Yet when it comes to just talking the characters in the game, sometimes the voice acting quality just drops substantially, and Jan Žižka was one of these characters that I did really notice with this. In the cutscenes, he sounded so cool and he sounded like they'd had a great professional voice actor working with him, and then when you just chat to the character in the world, all of a sudden his voice just sounds a little bit odd. I don't know what is going on with that, I'm going to be honest, but hey, I thought I'd bring it up anyway. The second map in Gutenberg, I love going throughout the city. It is so beautifully done. I mean, there's so much to explore. Even when you're not in these high-built urban areas, just walking around, despite the first game being incredibly big and incredibly detailed, it is nothing on KCD2. There are hundreds and hundreds of side characters and people that will just pop up that you can interact with, whether it's a guy with an arrow in his head that makes a Skyrim reference, or whether it's bandits on the road that will attack you, or maybe even sometimes they might let you go if you've got good enough armor or you gained enough fame in the tournament. These are all characters that you can play around with. There are priests in the abbey that can take you to hidden gems or even underground smugglers' tunnels that have some of the best loot within the game. In fact, just yesterday I played a side quest that took me into some underground tunnels and was absolutely terrifying, fighting some ghoulish, ghastly knight that, well, there was a lot more to him than I first thought. But all of these side quests are so in-depth, and there are full cutscenes written for quests that you might never play. Sometimes you have to let them go because you're going along this main storyline and somebody's died, or one of the side quests has sort of gone off on holiday, and you never actually get to experience them. And these are full side quests with cutscenes and characters and voice work and scripting, and maybe 40 minutes to an hour of extra content that sometimes you just don't touch. And that's what I love about this game, the trust that Warhorse have on their players. So we have a lot of the same mechanics coming back, whether it's combat or archery, sneaking around, lockpicking, that sort of thing. But what about some of the new mechanics? Well, you have the crime mechanics, which I think is really good addition that I managed to interact with a hell of a lot, but I'm sure some people just won't if they decide to be an honorable Henry. But at the start, if you get caught, you have to pay fines, or if you have good enough speech, you can talk your way out of it. You can also wear nicer clothes in order to help those speech and charisma points, or you can get in the stocks, Once you're in the stocks, you'll then be seen as a criminal, and merchant prices will go up. Some people not want to speak to you, or they'll comment on you as you walk past. Then if you're worse, you can get whipped and flayed, and once again you get injured and people comment on you and they put their prices up. If you're even worse, you can be branded and you have this scar on you for the rest of your entire game, and sometimes the merchants just won't serve you whatsoever. And then if you're caught when you're branded, you can actually just be executed. It's a cool little feature that I'm sure most people will not touch because it's completely pointless if you're trying to just play through the story as realistically and as hardcore as possible. However, what I would say is it's a nice little feature to some people that want to play this a little bit more casually. Speaking of casually though, what's the difficulty like? Well, there is one difficulty setting through the whole game. It is not, well, ranked in any sort of way. And I'm going to be honest, at the start, you'll really struggle. And then once you get to like 15, 20 hours in, you might start to find it a little bit too easy, especially if you spend all the time doing all the side quests in the first area. As soon as you get to the second map, you'll just be mowing through enemies and you'll find it incredibly easy to get money and buy the best armor. However, I do think that will come and be sorted with a hardcore mode later on, like they did for the first KCD. But I will say it's a little bit easier, I think, than the first, but that's just down to its more refined mechanics. The combat is so much better, fighting against multiple opponents. Crossbows make, projectile firing much better than archery. And of course, you have those hand cannons, which, granted, are incredibly powerful, but you cannot hit anything. I went hunting deer with them, and I could not point blank these guys. It was well, pretty realistic to what a hand cannon would be. So let's talk about that combat. Combat is something that really has to be leveled up as you go throughout the game. Fighting with swords is as you'd expect, and having a shield gives you a little bit more protection. Now, armor really comes into its own here. Chainmail will pretty much make sword slices, unless you're hitting their face, well, useless. So actually coming up someone with chainmail, stabbing is going to be your best bet. Or if they've got heavier armor like a kettle hat or even full plate, getting out your hammer is a really good way of bashing their noggin in. Guards will also have pole arms, which essentially gives them all that extra range, so you have to get in nice and close, and in doing so you can trigger some counter movements. Being able to hit them with your pommel or stab them through their neck with your sword if you get a cool finishing move. Not that I really got that. And these kind of have almost quick time events, bringing up the shield to right click to block, and then the cross swords to left click to attack. And if you do it in time, you can do a great little combo on them. Generally, fighting against multiple opponents has been improved so much. Even if you're facing one opponent locked on, a shield to block will appear if another opponent has attacked you, and Henry will automatically turn and block them in, obviously, the most realistic way. He doesn't do 360 spins, but hey, I think it is so much better than the first game. Once again, I think combat is something that you'll find really easy once you've got the hang with the stamina system, because blocking and striking all uses stamina, including dodging and running and jumping uses a hell of a lot of stamina. So a lot of the time at the start, you'll be really convinced that you have to counter every time you block, but you'll slowly realize, especially against multiple opponents, your stamina drains so fast. So making sure sometimes you just block and step back, gain that stamina back before you go into a flurry of attacks. And for me, at least, this felt like the best way of doing it. Archery is exactly the same. It's really annoying and really hard. That's all I'm going to say. Just practice your archery a lot. In terms of bugs, the game is not perfect. Now, don't get me wrong. It's really well optimized. It looks gorgeous. Shadows are lovely. And, well, everything about this world is one of the most aesthetically pleasing, especially the ambience. Who knew that rainstorms and lightning could be so relaxing sometimes? Yet there are definitely some bugs. I teleported into carts sometimes. I had people that were glitching on walls. Sometimes the AI just wouldn't properly work, and some missions just got completely botched because I didn't exactly know why the AI had its head in a wall. But it is so much less so than the first game. You're not going to go into this with a completely bug-free experience, but because it's launch day, they do have that day one patch, which should be sorting a lot of them, and I know a lot of the bugs mentioned already have been fixed. There are often times that I mistook gameplay mechanics for bugs, which, I mean, take that as you will, but really this game does focus on the game's not bad, you're just not good at it kind of attitude. that I think a lot of people will love, but will maybe rub people the wrong way. One mission I got ambushed and there was a huge amount of enemies and I couldn't win this thing, and it wasn't like it was close. At the end of every round, I just kept getting battered by 8 or 9 enemies that had killed the rest of my party, and I was wondering, what's going on here? Is this mission just broken? Because there seems like there's no way I can win it. So then I messaged my friend Sexy Biscuit saying, how did you do this? And they said, go for the leader first. So I decided to try a different way. I got my hand cannon out and I shot the leader in the face. I then went and helped all of my friendly troops to fight their opponents without facing one-on-one with anyone myself to slow down the combat. And we were able to absolutely demolish the enemy. So oftentimes you'll find missions that are so incredibly tricky until you find a new solution to it. And there are multiple solutions for every single mission, whether you go loud or quiet, disguise yourself as somebody else, sneak in and kill them at night, or just rob them and make them wonder where their clothes are. There are so many things that you can do in missions and without missions, and I'm going to be bringing them all to you very, very soon. I mean, being able to steal all the clothes of every guard within a village and then seeing them walk around with no shoes on the next morning, that's just a mechanic in the game. Being able to rob the dice player while they're sleeping, get all your money back so they have nothing to bet on it in the next morning, that's not a mission, that's just part of the game. And you'll see so many of these stories and even the intertwining of the mission. One mission we had to take an army out across the countryside, and as we'd go through villages, a lot of the NPCs, not in cutscenes I might add, would just comment, wow, that's a big army. And these are the reactions that make this world feel so full and alive. I wanted to take a ride on a cart that was passing through a town, and some of the people in the back seat said, what's that stink? And I realized it was me because I'd just been shoveling saltpeter and burying bodies. Yeah, they didn't want to go if I was sitting in, so I had to go and wash myself before we could carry on. These are things that I've never really seen done to this level in any other game, and I think Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 does them perfectly. But are there any negatives? Well, for me personally, there are very, very few. Blacksmithing's not really that fun. It's a new mechanic, but I can't really be bothered with it. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of people that actually find some use with it. Making money is far too easy if you actually do all the side quests. And of course, if you're like me and you like robbing merchants, people just leave like $1,000 lying in their chests in their, well, admittedly locked storehouses. But they shouldn't be doing that. Anyone could pick that stuff up. In terms of difficulty, I think it can be a little bit easy later on and maybe a little bit hard earlier on. That might seem like a counterpoint. However, I think you will find a lot of varying success with that depending on your playstyle and how much time that you want to put into your character. And this is why I think a lot of people might have issues with the game, because they might go into it because they love medieval games or even RPGs, but much like the first, this is not really that. It is a medieval game and it is an RPG, but it takes them to the next level more than I've ever really seen. And you have to be able to accept that. You have to be able to spend a lot of time riding before you don't get knocked off your horse. Sometimes you'll be riding by enemies and you just want to get past them, but your horse will panic and throw you off and you'll get killed by them just because you haven't spent enough time training them or given the horse the right arms and armor and the confidence. Yes, the horse does actually have courage and confidence skills within this game to actually move through enemy territory without just throwing you off. And I think that kind of thing can frustrate people. But once again, it kind of comes back to the attitude that the game has is the game's not bad, just you are at this point in time. So accept that and try and work through the game in that mindset, and you'll have so much fun, because this is the most immersive world that I've ever played within the game. It is the most historically accurate medieval world as well, and I love how much attention to detail they have put into it. Warhorse Studios have clearly had a vision and they have executed it to almost perfection, and I think that nobody can take that away from them. As much as it feels like there's been some rising controversy in the last few weeks coming up to Kingdom Come Deliverance, I personally think it has no effect on the gameplay. If you like the first game, you're going to adore this one. If you've never liked the first game, you're about to experience something that you never have within gaming before.